Me 24. Marketing Director at 175-employee advertising agency in Edinburgh, Scotland. Been working in marketing for 9 years. Fought hard to get to director level in male-dominated industry. Married to Colin. Saint-Chalou. Civil engineer who designs bridges and infrastructure projects. Together 6 years. Married for 3. We bought a 4-bedroom Victorian townhouse in Morningside 2 years ago. House needed work but had great bones. High ceilings. Original features. Colin was excited about having space for his hobby room. He's been into model building since he was a kid. Scale models of famous bridges and structures, spends hours researching historical engineering, recreating them in miniature with incredible detail. Has collection of about 30 models he's built over 15 years. Some are quite valuable. He's won awards at model engineering exhibitions. When we bought house, in agreement was he'd get the back bedroom on second floor for his hobby. Small room about 3M by 4M. Overlooked the garden. He spent 2 months setting it up perfectly. Custom shelving for his models. Proper lighting. Organized workspace with tools. Large desk where he could work on projects. Reference books on engineering history. He'd go in there 3 or 4 evenings a week. Couple hours at a time. Weekends, he'd spend 4 or 5 hours if he didn't have other plans. It was his decompression space where he'd relax after stressful work days. I thought it was a bit obsessive at first. But it made him happy and didn't affect our relationship. We'd have dinner together, talk about our days. Then he'd go work on whatever bridge he was building. I'd read or watch shows. We'd meet back up before bed. Worked fine for first year and a half in the house. Then I started following this feminist Instagram account about emotional labor and household dynamics. Account was run by therapists who talked about how women do invisible work in relationships. Mental load, planning, organizing, remembering things. Started posting about how men's hobbies are often prioritized over women's needs, that men get dedicated spaces for their interests while women's needs are dismissed. That man caves are symbol of male privilege in domestic spaces. One post really stuck with me. Why does he get a whole room for toys while you're managing the household? His leisure is prioritized. Your labor is invisible? Reclaim that space for something that benefits the partnership. Started looking at Colin's hobby room differently. Whole room dedicated to his models while I was working full-time and managing our social calendar. He got to check out into his hobby while I was planning dinners with friends. Organizing house maintenance. Remembering birthdays. Seemed unfair that he had this sanctuary while I was doing all the mental labor. Brought it up casually one evening. Do you ever think about how much space your models take up? He looked confused. It's just the one room, and we agreed on that when we bought the house. Told him things change and maybe we should reconsider how we're using space. I could use that room as a home office. I'm working from home more now. He pointed out, I already had desk space in our bedroom. But that's not a dedicated office. I need proper workspace. He seemed concerned, but willing to discuss, where would my models go? Some of them are quite delicate and took years to build. Told him maybe he could scale back the hobby. It seemed excessive anyway. Scale back. This is something I've done since I was 12. It's important to me. Said his hobby was taking up space that could be used for more practical purposes. He dropped it. But I could tell he was upset. A few days later, brought it up again more directly. I've been thinking about equity in our relationship. You have entire room for hobby while I'm managing everything else. It's not fair that your leisure is prioritized over household needs. Colin looked genuinely baffled. What household needs require that room? We have plenty of space. Explained about emotional labor and mental load. That I was doing invisible work planning our lives while he got to play with models. That his hobby room was symbol of male privilege. He sat back looking hurt. I work 50 hours a week. I contribute to household. I help with cooking and cleaning. My hobby room was something we agreed on. It's few hours a week where I decompress. How is that male privilege? Told him he wasn't understanding the deeper point about gender dynamics, that he felt entitled to that space in a way I didn't feel entitled to anything, that his hobby was prioritized from the beginning. We both agreed on it. You said you thought it was great I had creative outlet, said I'd been socialized to prioritize his needs over my own, that I was waking up to unfair dynamics in our relationship. He looked exhausted. What do you want me to do? Told him I wanted him to give up the hobby room so I could use it as proper home office, that his models could go in the basement. He stood up, clearly angry now. The basement is damp. It would ruin years of work. These models are precision pieces. Some are historically significant recreations. I'm not just throwing them in a basement, said his attachment to objects over my needs was proving my point, that he cared more about his toys than my well-being. He left the room without responding. Didn't speak much for a couple days. Tension was heavy. Posted about it on Instagram story. When you realize his hobby room is actually symbol of domestic inequity, why do men get dedicated spaces for leisure while women manage invisible labor? Time to reclaim space for what matters. Got tons of supportive responses. Yes. Man caves are ridiculous. He can make room for his toys. You need proper workspace. Don't back down on this. Few critical responses, saying I was being unfair. Did you agree to this setup when you bought the house? Sounds like you're moving goalposts. Responded that I'd been operating under internalized patriarchy, that I was now seeing situation clearly. Week after our argument, told Colin, I decided the hobby room needed to transition to my office. I need you to clear your models out by end of the month. He looked at me like I'd slapped him. You're seriously demanding I give up something we agreed on 2 years ago without any real discussion or compromise. Told him this wasn't negotiation. It was about fixing unfair dynamic. That I needed him to support my growth and needs. He was quiet for a long moment. Where exactly do you expect me to put everything? Suggested the basement again. Or maybe he could rent storage unit. So I should pay to store my hobby because you've decided our agreement doesn't matter anymore. Said he was being defensive and not hearing my needs. He laughed bitterly. I'm hearing you fine. You want me to abandon hobby I've had for 24 years because you read some Instagram posts, and when I point out, this violates our agreement. I'm being defensive. Told him his dismissiveness was exactly the problem. That he couldn't see his own privilege. 2 weeks before my deadline, Colin hadn't moved anything. Hobby room looked exactly the same. Confronted him about it. I asked you to clear this space. You're ignoring my needs. He looked at me very calmly. I've thought about this a lot. And I've realized you're right about one thing. This room is important, and the person who uses it should be the one who values it. Felt validated that he was finally understanding. So you'll move your models. He smiled in a way I didn't recognize. No. I'm moving into the room permanently. Didn't understand what he meant. What are you talking about? He explained he'd spent last 2 weeks setting up the hobby room as complete living space. Bought a single bed that arrived yesterday. Set it up in there. Moved clothes into the closet. Have small fridge I'm bringing up tomorrow. You want the space to be just yours for your needs. I want this space to be just mine for my needs. So, I'm moving in, and you can have the rest of the house. Started laughing because it seemed ridiculous. You can't just move into the hobby room. He shrugged. Why not? It's big enough. It has everything I need. You've made it clear you don't respect my hobby or my need for this space. So I'll live in here where my things are respected, and you can have entire rest of house for your office or whatever you want. Realized he was serious. This is childish. You're being ridiculous. He started walking toward the hobby room. I'm being clear about my boundaries. You wanted this space. I'm keeping this space. We can be married people who live in same house but different rooms. Followed him to the hobby room door. He went inside and I heard lock click. Colin, open this door right now. His voice came through the door. No. This is my private space now. Just like you wanted private office space. We both get what we want. Stood there stunned. He'd actually lock me out of the room. Banged on door. You can't just lock yourself in a room. We need to talk about this. We can talk through the door. I'm comfortable in here. Spent next hour trying to reason with him through locked door. He was pleasant, but firm. He'd eat meals in his room. He'd shower and use bathroom when needed. But otherwise he was staying in there. This is insane. You're destroying our marriage over a room. His response was calm. You said my hobby room represented unfair dynamic. So I removed the dynamic by removing myself from shared space. Problem solved. First night he actually slept in there. I slept in our bedroom alone. Furious and confused. Next morning, he came out at 6:30, showered, dressed for work in the bathroom, made himself breakfast, tried to talk to him. Can we please discuss this like adults? He was polite, but distant. Nothing to discuss. You wanted space. I'm giving you space. You have whole house except one room. Seems fair. Left for work without kissing me goodbye. First time in 3 years. Called my sister to vent. She was blunt. What did you expect would happen? You demanded he give up something he loves because of Instagram posts? He found a solution where you can't force him to comply. Said she didn't understand the principle. I understand you're being controlling, and he's setting boundary. Maybe back off and apologize. Hung up, frustrated. She wasn't supporting me. Posted about situation on Instagram. Update. He's literally locked himself in his hobby room to avoid addressing inequity. This is male fragility at its finest. Rather than engage with valid criticism, he's retreating into his toys. Comments were mixed. Some supportive, he's manipulating you. This is emotional abuse. Others critical. You demanded he give up, agreed upon space. He set boundary and now you're mad. One comment really annoyed me. You're upset he won't let you control him. Second night, Colin slept in a hobby room again. Could hear him in there working on model. Occasional classical music playing. He seemed completely content. I was sleeping alone in our big bedroom. Feeling like marriage was falling apart. Third day. Tried different approach. Colin, I'm sorry for how I handled this. Can we please talk about compromise? He opened doors slightly. Stayed in doorway. What kind of compromise? Suggested maybe we could share the space. You could use it for models. I could use it as office sometimes. He shook his head. No. You made it clear. You don't respect my hobby or my use of this space. I'm not sharing space with someone who thinks my life's work is just toys. This is mine now, completely. Asked when he was planning to move back to our bedroom. When you genuinely understand why what you did was wrong. Not when you're pretending to apologize to get what you want. Closed door again. Lock clicked. Fourth night. I was getting desperate. Our friends had noticed Colin wasn't responding to group chat messages about weekend plans. One friend texted me directly. Is everything okay with you and Colin? He's being weird. Didn't know how to explain situation without sounding insane. Told her we were having disagreement about house stuff. She asked if we needed anything. Said we'd work it out. Week into Colin's room occupation, my mother visited. Immediately noticed tension. Where's Colin? It's Saturday afternoon. He's usually here. Told her he was in his hobby room. She went and knocked on door. Colin opened it. Was perfectly pleasant to her. He, Margaret. Good to see you. They chatted briefly before she asked, Are you coming out for tea? No. Thank you. I'm working on a project. Having tea in here. My mother looked between us, confused. After Colin closed door, she pulled me aside. What's going on? Why is he locked in there? Explained the whole situation. Her response was not supportive. You demanded he give up his hobby room, and now you're upset he set a boundary. What did you think would happen? Tried to explain about emotional labor and equity. She cut me off. I've been married 42 years. Your father has his workshop. I have my craft room. We respect each other's spaces. You're manufacturing a problem where there wasn't one. Said she didn't understand modern relationship dynamics. I understand you're being unreasonable and your husband is protecting something important to him. You should apologize properly and hope he forgives you. 2 weeks into situation. Colin had fully settled into living in hobby room. He brought in better bedding. Small microwave. Had system for meals. Would come out for work. Bathroom. Sometimes would cook elaborate meal for himself. I would say hello politely if we crossed paths. But that was it. No conversation. No intimacy. No shared life. We were roommates who happened to be married. Posted update on Instagram. 2 weeks of him living in the hobby room. This is what male privilege looks like when challenged. Complete withdrawal rather than engaging with legitimate concerns. Comments were increasingly divided. Supportive. He's punishing you for having boundaries. Critical. He's engaging by setting his own boundaries. You just don't like them. One comment from mutual friend was pointed. I know Colin. He's one of the most reasonable people I know. If he's locked himself in a room, you must have pushed really hard. 3 weeks in. I tried going into room while he was at work. Door was locked with deadbolt he'd installed. Texted him, you put a deadbolt on the door? His response, yes. It's my private space. I'm entitled to lock it. Me, this is our house. You can't just claim a room. Him. You tried to claim this exact room 3 weeks ago. Remember. Me, that was different. I needed it for work. Him, and I need it for my well-being. So, here we are. Month into the situation. Our friends invited us to dinner party. I went alone. Colin declined. Everyone asked where he was. Told them he wasn't feeling well. One friend pulled me aside later. Is your marriage okay? Colin's been really distant. Broke down and explained everything. She listened quietly before responding. Can I be honest with you? You sound controlling. Colin agreed to give up space he loved. And you demanded more? Now you're upset he protected himself. Said she didn't understand the feminist principles involved. I understand you read something online and decided to blow up your marriage. Colin's not your enemy. Started crying. He won't even talk to me anymore. She hugged me, then apologized sincerely and respect his space. Not because you want the room, but because you were wrong. 5 weeks in. Colin's behavior was completely stable. He'd settled into routine. Seemed genuinely content. Would chat pleasantly if we encountered each other. But maintained clear boundary, no discussion of marriage. Our relationship, future. Just polite roommate interactions. I was miserable. Sleeping alone every night. No intimacy. No connection. House felt empty, even though he was literally 1 floor above me. Tried one more time. Knocked on door late at night. Colin. Please can we talk about this? I miss you. I miss us. His voice through door was kind, but firm. I miss us too. But us included respecting each other's boundaries and agreements. You violated that. Until you genuinely understand why, there's no us to go back to. Asked what he wanted me to understand, that my hobby isn't less important than your Instagram activism, that agreements we make matter, that you can't demand I change my life because you decided old agreements are now unfair. When you understand those things, we can talk. 6 weeks in. Posted vulnerable update on Instagram, living like strangers in same house. All because I asked for equity. How do I make him see that his hobby isn't more important than our marriage? Comments came flooding in. Supportive. He's choosing toys over you. That's all you need to know. Critical. You chose Instagram activism over your marriage. Maybe look in mirror. One comment made me stop. You keep saying you asked for equity. But you demanded he give up something he loved. That's not equity. That's control. Equity would be you also having hobby space. Not taking his. Sat with that comment for a long time. Realized I'd never asked for my own hobby room. We had 4 bedrooms. Spare bedroom on first floor I could have claimed. I'd specifically wanted his room, his space, not because I needed that room, but because I wanted to prove point about priorities. 7 weeks into Colin living in hobby room, had breakdown during therapy session. Therapist had been listening to situation for weeks. She asked direct question, "What were you actually trying to accomplish by demanding the hobby room?" Started explaining about emotional labor and equity. She interrupted gently. "No. What were you trying to accomplish, not what the Instagram account said?" "What did you want?" Sat with question. Finally admitted truth. "I wanted him to choose me over his hobby. I wanted proof I was more important." She nodded. "And when he chose to protect his hobby by removing himself from the conflict, what did that tell you?" "That I'm not important to him." She leaned forward. "Or that he's important to himself, that he won't be controlled or manipulated, that he'll protect his boundaries even at cost of the relationship." Felt like she'd punched me. 8 weeks after Colin moved into hobby room, wrote him letter. Slid it under his door. Letter said, "Everything. I was wrong. I demanded you give up something you love. Not because I needed the space, but because I wanted you to prove I was more important than your hobby. I wanted you to choose me. Even if it meant sacrificing something meaningful to you, that was manipulative and controlling. I'm sorry for trying to control you. I'm sorry for violating our agreement. I'm sorry for dismissing something you love. I understand if you can't forgive me. But I needed you to know I finally understand what I did." 2 hours later, knock on my bedroom door. Colin stood there with my letter. "Can we talk?" Nodded. Terrified. We sat on bed, where we used to sleep together. "I've been thinking a lot these past 2 months. About our marriage. About what happened. About whether we can fix this." Waited for him to continue. "What you did wasn't really about the room. It was about control and respect. You read something that convinced you I was the problem. Instead of talking to me, you demanded I change. When I wouldn't comply, you tried to force me, agreed with everything." He continued, "These 2 months have been lonely. But they've also been peaceful. I've had time to think about whether I want to go back to relationship where my needs can be dismissed as male privilege." Started crying. "I know I can't change what I did. But I can promise I'll never try to control you like that again." He looked sad. "The problem is I don't know if I believe that. You were so certain you were right. So convinced by those Instagram posts that I was the enemy. What happens next time you read something that tells you I'm wrong?" Didn't have good answer. 9 weeks after Colin moved into hobby room, we started couples counseling. Colin's condition for trying to rebuild marriage. First session therapist asked us both to explain what happened. I explained about emotional labor and wanting equity. Colin explained about agreed upon space being violated. Therapist let us both speak before responding. It seems like there were 2 different problems happening. One was legitimate concern about household labor distribution. The other was demand that Colin give up something he values to prove he cares. Those are different issues that got tangled together. She looked at me. "Did you ever actually discuss household labor distribution before demanding the room?" Realized I hadn't. I'd gone straight from reading Instagram posts to demanding he give up his space. Never had conversation about whether I felt overburdened. Never asked him to take on more household tasks. Just decided his hobby room was symbol of inequity and needed to go. 10 weeks after Colin moved into hobby room, he moved back to our bedroom, not because everything was fixed, but because we were trying to rebuild. He still spent most evenings in hobby room, but we were sleeping in same bed, having dinners together, talking about actual household task distribution. Turned out Colin was right that he did contribute significantly. He did most of cooking, handled all car maintenance, managed home repairs, did yard work. I managed social calendar and handled some cleaning. When we actually itemized tasks, it wasn't imbalanced. I'd created narrative of inequity that didn't match reality. 3 months after everything started, posted final update on Instagram. I was wrong about the hobby room situation. I let social media convince me there was problem where there wasn't one. I tried to control my husband instead of communicating with him. I'm working on rebuilding trust. I damaged. Maybe don't take marriage advice from Instagram. Comments were predictably divided. Some people said I was capitulating to patriarchy. Others appreciated accountability. Lost several hundred followers who'd been there for the feminist content, but didn't care anymore about validation from strangers online. 6 months after Colin moved into Hobby Room, things were better but different. We were communicating more, respecting boundaries. But there was distance that hadn't existed before. He was more guarded, less open, would share things. But there was caution that never used to be there. One night I asked him directly, "Do you trust me the way you used to?" He thought carefully before answering, "I trust you to be better than you were. But I don't trust you the way I did before you tried to take away something I love." I don't know if that trust comes back. That honesty hurt, but it was deserved. 9 months after everything, went to mutual friend's birthday party. Woman I didn't know well approached me. I heard about what happened with Colin in the Hobby Room. I just wanted to say I did something similar with my ex-husband. Demanded he give up his music studio for my home office. He eventually did it. Resented me forever. We divorced 2 years later. I wish I'd handled it differently. Asked her what she would have done instead. I would have actually talked about my needs instead of deciding his hobby was the enemy. Probably would have just set up office and spare room instead of making it a power struggle. Would have saved my marriage. Year after Colin moved into Hobby Room, we were in better place, but scars remained. He still locked Hobby Room door when he wasn't there, said it wasn't because he didn't trust me, but because he needed to know his space was completely his. That boundary was his now and couldn't be violated. I'd given him reason to protect himself from me. 15 months after everything, stopped following all the feminist Instagram accounts that had convinced me my marriage was oppressive. Realized those accounts made money from creating conflict, from convincing women their partners were problems that needed fixing, from turning normal relationship dynamics into political battles, had nearly destroyed my marriage for content that made someone else money. 18 months after Colin moved into Hobby Room, he won award for Bridge Model at International Exhibition, recreation of Golden Gate Bridge, that took him 3 years to complete. I went to exhibition with him, saw his model displayed with others from around world, watched him talk to other model engineers about techniques and history, saw how much knowledge and skill went into hobby I dismissed as toys, felt deep shame that I'd wanted to take this away from him. 2 years after demanding Colin give up his Hobby Room, we were stable but changed. Marriage survived. But innocence didn't. He knew I was capable of trying to control him. I knew I was capable of prioritizing ideology over person I loved. We were building something new on damaged foundation. Working, but with cracks that would always show. Posted one final reflection on Instagram before deleting account. 2 years ago, I tried to take away my husband's Hobby Room because social media convinced me it represented inequity. In reality, I was the one creating inequity by violating our agreements. He protected himself by moving into the room completely. Locked me out until I understood what I'd done wrong. Took me 2 months to get it. 2 years later, we're still rebuilding. Trust I destroyed. Learned from my mistake. Social media activism isn't substitute for communication. Your partner isn't your enemy. And controlling someone isn't the same as creating equity. Deleted Instagram that night. Didn't need validation from strangers anymore. Needed to focus on marriage I'd nearly destroyed. 3 years after everything. Colin still has Hobby Room with deadbolt lock. Says he'll probably always keep it locked. Not because he thinks I'll try to take it again, but because he needs to know he has space that's completely his. That he can protect if he needs to. I damaged his sense of safety in our home. That damage doesn't fully heal. Current state is marriage that works, but isn't what it was. We're partners. But there's guardedness that never used to exist. We communicate better about needs and boundaries, but the easy trust is gone. He shares things, but holds parts of himself back. Protects himself in ways he never had to before. I showed him I might try to control him. 4 years after I tried to ban Colin from his Hobby Room, and he moved into it. locking me out. We're still married, still working on it, but we both know relationship is built on foundation I cracked. Some cracks can be repaired, but they're always visible. Reminders of the time I chose ideology over partnership. Instagram validation over actual communication. Control over respect. That's what I learned from trying to take my husband's hobby room, that you can't control someone into loving you, that social media activism can destroy real relationships, that violations of trust have permanent consequences, that good intentions don't excuse harmful actions. 4 years later, Colin has his hobby room with lock that's always engaged. And I have marriage that survived but was fundamentally altered by 2 months, where he had to lock himself away to protect something he loved from person who claimed to love him. That's the cost of trying to control instead of communicate, of following strangers online, instead of trusting person you married. For years of consequences, for demanding equity by creating inequity, the irony isn't lost on either of us. But irony doesn't heal damage. Only time and work do that. And even then, some things stay broken even when repaired. 5 years after Colin moved into hobby room to escape my control, attending wedding of mutual friends, sat at reception watching couples first dance, Colin reached over and held my hand. Small gesture that once would have been automatic, now felt significant. Like gift he was choosing to give, leaned over and whispered, "Thank you for still being here." He squeezed my hand, but didn't look at me. "I'm here because you did the work to understand what you did. But I'm also here because I decided my boundaries matter more than avoiding conflict." That distinction was important to him. He hadn't just forgiven and forgotten. He'd rebuilt relationship on terms that protected him. Later that night, getting ready for bed, asked him something I'd wondered about for years. "Do you ever regret not just leaving me when I demanded the hobby room?" He was quiet for a long moment, brushing his teeth, finally responded, "I thought about it. Those 2 months in the hobby room, I looked at flats online, calculated what divorce would cost, imagined life without you." Felt sick hearing this even though I'd suspected it. "What made you stay?" He sat on edge of bed. "Honestly, partly stubbornness. I didn't want to lose my home and my marriage because you got radicalized by Instagram. But also, somewhere under the controlling behavior, you were still person I married. I just had to figure out if that person could come back." Asked if he thought that person had come back. "Mostly, but you're also different now. More cautious about what you believe online. More aware of your own capacity for control. That awareness makes you safer." The word safer landed hard. I'd made him feel unsafe in our own home. 5.5 years after everything, Colin's mother mentioned the hobby room situation during family dinner. She'd apparently heard about it from my mother years ago, but never said anything. I heard you two had quite the standoff over Colin's model room. Felt face flush with embarrassment. Colin handled it gracefully. We had a difficult period. Worked through it. Learned a lot. His mother looked at me directly. "My son has had that hobby since he was 12 years old. His father built models with him before he died. Those models are part of his history. His connection to his dad. Hadn't known that detail. Colin had mentioned his father got him into model building. But not that depth of connection. Felt even worse about trying to take it away. After his mother left, asked Colin why he'd never told me about his father. I did early on when we first dated. You probably forgot. But also, I shouldn't have to justify my hobby with dead father's story. It should have been enough that it mattered to me." He was absolutely right. 6 years after Colin moved into hobby room, finally had conversation we should have had at the beginning about actual household labor distribution and mental load. Sat down with spreadsheet and listed everything. Who did what? Who managed what? Who remembered what? Turned out my perception of doing all invisible work was inaccurate. Colin managed all home maintenance, car issues, financial planning, tech problems, yard work. He remembered his family's birthdays and organized gifts. He planned our vacations and researched where to go. I managed social calendar with friends. Some cleaning. Some meal planning. When we actually looked at data, he was doing more invisible work than I was. But I convinced myself I was overburdened, because Instagram told me women always are. I'm sorry I assumed you weren't contributing. I'm sorry I didn't actually ask or look before deciding there was problem. He nodded, accepting apology but not minimizing what had happened. You almost destroyed us over a problem that didn't exist based on what strangers on internet told you to believe. That's what scares me most. Not what you did, but how easily you were convinced I was the enemy. 6.5 years after everything, ran into Emma at coffee shop. Emma had been in that original feminist Instagram group that convinced me Colin's hobby room was oppression. She'd gone through messy divorce year after I deleted my account. Sat down with her. Curious about her story. Turned out she'd also demanded her husband give up his workshop space. He'd refused. She'd escalated. Eventually divorced him over it. I was so sure I was right. All those posts about male privilege and weaponized hobbies convinced me my husband was problem. Asked if she regretted it now. Every day. He was a good man who worked hard and had one hobby he loved. I turned it into battleground because internet told me to. Now I'm alone, and he's remarried to someone who appreciates him. Told her about Colin moving into the hobby room. She laughed bitterly. Smart man. He protected himself and made you face what you were doing. My ex just kept trying to compromise until he had nothing left. Then he left. We sat in silence for a moment. Those Instagram accounts made money off destroying our marriages. They're still out there telling other women their partners are oppressing them, creating problems where there aren't any. 7 years after Colin moved into hobby room, he finally removed the deadbolt. Didn't make an announcement about it. Just noticed one day the lock was gone. Asked him about it that evening. Did you take the lock off your hobby room door? He nodded while cooking dinner. Figured 7 years was long enough. Either I trust you now, or I never will. Decided to trust you. Started crying at kitchen table. 7 years to rebuild enough trust that he'd remove lock from his own door. 7 years of consequences for 2 months of my controlling behavior. He came over and hugged me. Hey, we made it. That's more than a lot of couples do after something like this. But we both knew, making it look different than what we'd started with. 7.5 years after everything. Colin published article in Engineering magazine about the connection between model building and mental health. How having creative outlet helped him process stress and maintain equilibrium. Article mentioned difficult period where his hobby space was threatened. How protecting that space protected his well-being. Included line that made me cry. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone you love is refuse to be controlled by them. Setting boundaries isn't rejection. It's foundation for healthy relationship. Article got positive response from other engineers who'd faced similar pressure. Comments from men thanking him for articulating importance of having personal space. One comment from woman stood out. I'm the wife who tried to take away the hobby space. Reading this helped me understand what I almost destroyed. Thank you for sharing your experience. 8 years after I tried to ban Colin from his hobby room, and he moved into it completely. We're still married. Still working on relationship that survived but was fundamentally changed. The easy, unconditional trust is gone. Replaced with intentional earned trust, the assumption that we'd always prioritize each other is gone. Replaced with understanding that boundaries matter more than comfort. Colin still spends evenings in hobby room, but now I bring him tea sometimes. Sit and watch him work on intricate models. Ask questions about engineering and history. Appreciate hobby I once tried to destroy. 8 years later, I understand what I almost lost. Not just marriage, but good man who had reasonable boundary, who protected himself when I tried to control him, who gave me chance to become better person after I'd shown him my worst self. That's what I learned from Feminist ban on my husband's hobby room. That led to him moving into it and locking me out, that boundaries are form of love. that protecting yourself from control is healthy, that social media activism can destroy real relationships, that good intentions paired with control create damage, that some consequences last forever even when relationship survives. 8 years of living with what I did, 8 years of marriage that works but will never be innocent again because I chose ideology over partnership. Instagram validation over actual communication, and my husband had to lock himself in room to protect something he loved from me. 9 years after Colin moved into hobby room, our daughter was born. We'd waited long time to have children, partly because of age, partly because we wanted marriage solid first. Named her Claire after Colin's mother. Watching him hold her in hospital, thought about, man, I'd almost driven away. How different life would be if he'd chosen to leave instead of lock himself in room. Claire would never have existed. This whole beautiful future would have been erased because I'd been convinced by strangers online that his hobby was oppression. Few months after Claire was born, Colin converted spare bedroom on first floor into nursery, did all the work himself, painted murals of bridges and buildings on walls. His engineering background and artistic skill combined into something beautiful. One night while feeding Claire, mentioned how nursery could have been my office years ago if I just claimed the spare room instead of demanding yours. Colin looked up from changing table. I thought about that a lot during those 2 months. We had perfectly good spare room you could have used. But you specifically wanted mine. That's when I knew it wasn't about needing office space. It was about control. Asked what he would have done if I just asked for the spare room as my office. I would have helped you set it up. Would have built you custom shelving. Helped you paint. We'd have had 2 dedicated spaces and no crisis. The simplicity of what could have been versus what actually happened was devastating. 9.5 years after everything, Claire started showing interest in Colin's models, would toddle into hobby room and pointed bridges with wonder. Colin would pick her up and explain each one. This is Brooklyn Bridge. Connects Manhattan to Brooklyn. This is Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco. Took 4 years to build. Watching them together, saw generational healing happening. Colin sharing his passion with daughter in space I'd once tried to take from him. One afternoon, Claire knocked over small model he'd been working on. Not one of precious historical recreations. Just practice piece, but it broke into several pieces. Held my breath, waiting to see his reaction. He just laughed and picked her up. That's okay. Sweetheart, we'll build new one together when you're bigger. Later told him I was impressed by his patience. It's just a model. She's my daughter. Priorities matter. The unspoken implication hung there. He'd always known the difference between objects and people. I'd been the one who'd confused the two, who'd thought taking away objects would prove people's priorities. 10 years after Colin moved into hobby room, attended his father's memorial model exhibition. Colin organized show of his father's models alongside his own, displayed side by side, showing evolution of techniques across generations. His opening speech mentioned how model building connected him to father he'd lost at 15. These models are history, art, engineering, memory, meditation, connection. They're how my father taught me to see the world, how I process stress and find peace, how I'll teach my daughter about patience and precision. Looked at me directly during next part. 10 years ago, someone I love asked me to give this up to prove she mattered more than hobby. But the question was wrong from the beginning. People we love shouldn't have to destroy parts of themselves to prove their devotion. Real love makes space for each person to be whole. Exhibition was beautiful success. Multiple people approached me afterward. Your husband is incredibly talented. These models are museum quality. Each comment reminded me I'd almost made him give this up, almost destroyed this gift because Instagram told me it was male privilege. 10.5 years after everything? Therapist asked question during session. If you could go back and talk to yourself before you demanded the hobby room, what would you say? Thought carefully. I'd tell myself that equity isn't about making everything identical, that Colin having dedicated hobby space doesn't mean I'm oppressed, that I could have just claimed spare room for myself instead of taking his that social media activists don't know my marriage better than I do, that trying to control someone to prove they love you accomplishes the opposite. Therapist nodded. What do you think that version of you would have done with that information? Answered honestly, probably ignored it. I was so convinced by those Instagram accounts. So sure, I was seeing truth everyone else missed. I wouldn't have listened to anyone, including myself. That realization was humbling. I'd been unreachable during that period, radicalized by algorithm that fed me increasingly extreme content. 11 years after Colin moved into Hobby Room, he was interviewed for documentary about model engineering. Filmmaker asked about his creative process and inspiration. Colin talked about his father, about history, about finding peace in precision work. Then, filmmaker asked about challenges he'd faced maintaining hobby. There was period where my hobby space was threatened. My spouse had been influenced by social media content, suggesting my hobby represented inequity in our relationship. She demanded I give up my space. I chose to move into that space completely instead. Lived there for 2 months until she understood that controlling someone isn't the same as creating equity. Filmmaker asked how that affected relationship. It damaged trust in fundamental way, but it also established that I have boundaries that won't be violated, that I'll protect my well-being even at cost of comfort. 11 years later, we're still together, still rebuilding, but that period changed us permanently. Documentary aired year later. Several friends reached out after watching, some supportive of me, some of Colin, but most had same reaction. I had no idea you two went through something that serious. You always seem so stable now. We were stable. But stability built on crisis is different than stability that's never been tested. 12 years after I tried to ban Colin from his hobby room, and he moved into it, locking me out, Claire turned 3 and started asking questions about Daddy's special room. Why does Daddy have room with all the bridges? Colin explained patiently. Because everyone needs space for things they love. Mommy has her office. Daddy has hobby room. These are our special spaces. Claire accepted this easily. The simplicity of respecting boundaries came naturally to her. Had to learn it the hard way myself. 12 years later, understanding that control dressed up as equity is still control, that demanding someone prove their love by destroying parts of themselves is manipulation, that social media activism without real-world wisdom creates problems instead of solving them. 12 years of living with consequences, of marriage that survived but bears scars, of trust that was rebuilt but never quite the same. Colin still has his hobby room. I still have my guilt. And Claire has 2 parents who learned hard lessons about boundaries, control, and what love actually means. That's the final accounting. 12 years after I almost destroyed everything for progressive credentials and Instagram validation. We're still here. Still married. Still working. Still living with what I did and what Colin had to do to protect himself from me. 13 years after Colin moved into Hobby Room, Claire asked me direct question, Mommy, why do you look sad when you watch Daddy in his bridge room? Didn't realize my guilt was visible to 7-year-old. Tried to explain in age-appropriate way. Sometimes Mommy made mistakes before you were born. Mistakes that hurt Daddy. And sometimes I remember those mistakes and feel sad. She thought about this seriously. Did you say sorry? Told her yes. Many times. Did Daddy forgive you? Looked over at Colin, working on model with Claire's help. Yes. Daddy forgave me. But some hurts take long time to heal completely. She nodded with wisdom beyond her years. Like when I broke my arm and it healed? But sometimes still hurts when it rains. Exact right metaphor. Yes. Sweetheart. Exactly like that. 14 years after everything. Attending Claire's school event. Another mother approached me. I follow you on Instagram. Oh. Wait. You deleted your account years ago. I remember your posts about challenging male privilege in marriage. Whatever happened with that? Felt Colin tænse beside med. Answered honestly, I learned I was wrong about a lot of things. That I was creating problems where none existed. Nearly destroyed my marriage over ideology. From strangers online. She looked uncomfortable. Oh? I just thought you were so brave speaking out. Colin spoke up. Voice measured but firm. She wasn't brave. She was controlling. Bravery would have been admitting she was wrong sooner. The woman made excuse and left quickly. Apologized to Colin for her bringing it up. He squeezed my hand. It happened. It's part of our story. Can't pretend it didn't. 15 years after Colin moved into hobby room to escape my control. Sitting at daughter's 8th birthday party, watching Colin show her friends his bridge models. Their faces full of wonder at the intricate structures. One little girl asked, "Why do you make these?" Colin smiled. "Because they make me happy, and because everyone needs something that's just theirs. Something they create. Something they love. Something no one can take away." Looked at me when he said that last part. 15 years, and the lesson still echoed. Later that night, after Claire was asleep, Colin and I sat in garden. "Do you think about those 2 months often?" I asked. He considered the question. Not as much anymore. But every time I walk into that room, there's split second where I remember locking the door, remember feeling like I had to protect myself in my own home, remember deciding my boundaries mattered more than keeping peace, asked if he thought we'd ever fully move past it. We have moved past it. Moving past doesn't mean forgetting. It means integrating it into who we are now. We're not the same people we were 15 years ago. We're people shaped by that crisis. For better and worse, 15 years later, knowing he was right, we were shaped by my attempt at control and his refusal to be controlled. The marriage that survived was stronger in some ways, but marked forever by those 2 months when he had to lock himself away to protect something he loved from person who claimed to love him. That's what 15 years of marriage after crisis looks like. Stronger but scarred, surviving but changed, together but forever aware of what almost was lost and what can never be fully restored. Even with all the love and work and time, some things stay broken even when repaired.